I'm a 28-year-old woman engaged to my amazing fiancé 30M. We've been together for 5 years, and for the past 2 years, we've been saving every extra penny for our dream wedding. Not an over-the-top, princess-style wedding, just a beautiful, well-planned day with our closest friends and family. We had set aside $25,000, a mix of our own savings and contributions from his parents, safely tucked away in a joint account. At least that's where it was supposed to stay. My mom, 54F, and stepdad, 56M, have always had strong opinions about money. But they believe that families should trust each other with everything, and they often remind me that we're all in this together. So when they suggested we transfer the wedding fund to their account for safekeeping, they framed it as a way to help us manage expenses. Their reasoning? They had a more stable bank account with fewer transactions. It would prevent any accidental overspending before the wedding. They could help with deposits since vendors might require wire transfers. I hesitated, but they were insistent. My mom reassured me, it's just so you don't have to worry about anything. We'll only release the money when you need it. My stepdad chimed in, we're just trying to help. It's not like we're going to spend it. So, against my better judgment, I agreed. Fast forward a few months. Our venue was chosen, caterers and a photographer were lined up, and we were getting ready to put down deposits. All we needed was a portion of our money to lock everything in. That's when things started getting weird. I asked my mom to send over $5,000 for the first round of deposits. She said, "Oh, I'll do it tomorrow." The bank's been weird lately. Tomorrow turned into next week. Then the next excuse, your stepdad has to go in person to transfer such a large amount. I reminded her that they accepted wire transfers. Silence. By the third time I asked, my stepdad suddenly had a business emergency that had frozen their funds for a few weeks. But he assured me, it's all fine, don't worry, the money's safe. At this point, I was getting anxious. Our vendors were waiting, and I needed the deposit money. I started pushing harder, demanding answers. And then, out of nowhere, my parents started renovating their kitchen. New cabinets, brand new countertops, a full remodel. I'm talking state-of-the-art appliances, an expensive backsplash, and custom flooring. The works. At first, I didn't want to believe it. I told myself they must have saved up for this. But the timeline? Too perfect. They started the renovations right after I asked for my money back. The cost? Almost exactly what we had saved for the wedding. I confronted my mom. At first, denial. She insisted, "Oh, honey, we've been planning this for ages. We just happened to start now." I pressed harder. "Where's my money?" More excuses. "We just had to move some things around, but we'll pay you back soon." And then, after enough pushing, the truth came out. They had spent it. "We thought you were going overboard with the wedding." It just seemed like a better investment. It's an investment. They took our money, without asking, and used it to upgrade their house because they thought a wedding was frivolous. I was in shock. $25,000, gone. Just like that. When I told my fiancé, he lost it. He wanted to take legal action, to cut them off completely, to make them pay immediately. But my parents? No remorse. My stepdad shrugged it off like it was no big deal. "We'll pay it back eventually. Just give us some time." My mom was even worse. She acted offended that I was mad about it. "We're family. Why are you treating us like criminals?" When I told my extended family, opinions were split. Some were horrified. "That's unforgivable. How could they do that to you?" But others, "Family comes first. It's just money. You can make more. Your parents helped you your whole life. Why can't you cut them some slack?" I was furious. Our wedding was ruined. We couldn't afford our venue anymore. Everything we had planned? Gone. That's when the idea hit me. I was half joking when I said to my fiancé, "Well, since they spent our money on their house, maybe we should just have the wedding there." I expected him to shut it down, but instead, he smirked. "Why not?" I looked at him. "Wait, seriously." He leaned back, arms crossed. "They wanted to invest in their house, right? Let's make sure they get their money's worth." And just like that, the perfect revenge was set in motion. If they thought they could take our money without consequences, they were in for a very rude awakening. Because now, we were throwing the wedding of the century at their house. The moment the idea was planted, the plan started forming itself. If my parents spent our wedding fund on their house, they were going to get exactly what they paid for, a wedding, at their house. The first step? Setting the stage. Casually, I started dropping comments to extended family about how grateful I was that my parents were letting us use their house as the venue. Not a question. Not a question. Not a suggestion. A fact. Yeah, since they spent our wedding fund on the renovations, it just made sense to hold it there. It looks amazing, doesn't it? The reactions were better than expected. Aunt Linda, always the first to comment on family matters, clapped her hands. "Oh, that's so generous of them." Cousins chimed in with excitement. "That's actually so smart. And free. You'll save so much money." Word spread like wildfire. Suddenly, people were reaching out, praising my parents for their generosity. The best part? My parents had no idea. 2 days later, I dropped the bomb. I was at their house, acting completely normal, scrolling on my phone, when I casually mentioned it. "Oh, by the way, I confirmed with the caterer. They'll be setting up here around noon on the wedding day." The silence was instant. My mom blinked, her face stuck in a frozen, forced smile. My stepdad's newspaper lowered an inch. "Here?" I nodded. "Yeah, of course. I mean, it makes perfect sense, right?" Nothing. They just stared. Then panic. My stepdad immediately tried shutting it down. "That's not happening." I shrugged. "You already contributed." The money went into the house, so in a way, you've already hosted the wedding. My mom's face turned pale. She stammered something about space, noise, parking issues. I just nodded along, completely unfazed. Then, the best part, my aunt walked in at the worst possible time for them. I was just telling them how amazing it is that they're hosting the wedding here. Trapped. She gushed about how beautiful their new kitchen would look in the photos, about how lucky I was to have such generous parents stepping up to save the wedding. My mom barely held it together. My stepdad's jaw clenched so hard I thought his teeth might crack. The pressure started building fast. By the end of the day, half the family thought this was their idea. The next week was chaos. Vendors had to be rebooked. The backyard needed a full setup: tents, chairs, tables, decorations. All of it. Every time a new update came in, my stepdad looked like he wanted to combust. Then came his last-ditch effort. "I'll cancel it." I smiled. "You can't cancel something that's not yours. It's our house." I tilted my head. "And our wedding fund." "But that didn't stop you, did it?" Checkmate. My mom cracked first. One night, she burst into full-blown tears. She sobbed about how unfair this was, about how much stress she was under, about how I was punishing her for a simple mistake. I just blinked at her. "You're not being punished. You're being celebrated." Her sobs halted. I kept going. "Everyone thinks you're being so generous. You should be proud." More tears. No response. As the wedding planning ramped up, my parents tried regaining control. First, the guest list. They started slipping in extra invites. Their friends, their coworkers, people I had never met in my life. I shut that down fast. "No worries, I already finalized the list. Too late to add anyone now." Then, decorations. My mom suddenly wanted a say in the color scheme. My stepdad tried changing the seating arrangement. I just smiled. "You lost the right to make decisions when you spent the budget." They had nothing to say to that. The final straw. My stepdad tried demanding rent. "If you're using the house, you should pay." I laughed. Loudly. Then I leaned in. "With what money?" He turned red. I didn't let him finish. "If I had the wedding fund, I'd be paying for a venue. But you made sure I didn't." Silence. I leaned back. "You wouldn't want to look bad, right? With the whole family thinking you're so generous." That was the end of that conversation. With less than a month to go, my mom made one last desperate move. She started calling relatives, painting herself as the victim. She told them I was forcing this on them, that she never agreed to it, that I was punishing them over something already done. But by then it was too late. People had already chosen sides. Most family members were excited. They were praising my parents for their generosity, gushing about how amazing it was that they were stepping up. The pressure only grew. Finally, I gave them one last warning. "You have two choices. Either we have the wedding here, or I tell everyone why we actually have to." For the first time, they didn't argue. They just sat there, defeated. Because now, it wasn't just my wedding, it was their consequence. Since we were now working with a completely different setup, I needed someone who could handle last-minute logistics. A full-scale wedding planner was out of the budget, so I hired a day of coordinator instead, someone who would make sure everything ran smoothly without my mom trying to hijack the event. Next, the dress. Originally, I had a different one in mind, but thanks to my parents' investment, the budget had changed. Instead of sulking, I got resourceful. A quick search through secondhand designer listings landed me an absolutely stunning dress at a fraction of the cost. It needed a few alterations, but nothing major. A small win. Then, fiancé's family came through. His parents, seeing the disaster unfold, stepped in and offered to cover food and music costs. A caterer was booked and a DJ locked in. The essentials were falling into place. Meanwhile, my parents? Still in denial. As the wedding date got closer, my mom switched strategies. Instead of arguing, she suddenly became too sick to handle the stress. First, it was headaches. Then, fatigue. Finally, she claimed she might not be able to even attend the wedding if things didn't slow down. Nobody bought it. Not when she was still posting Facebook updates about how wonderful her new kitchen looked. By then, out-of-town guests started arriving. Cousins, aunts, uncles, people who had already made travel plans and were excited for the wedding. There was no way my parents could pull the plug without making themselves look insanely bad. The best part? Every single person who walked in had the same first reaction. "Wow, the kitchen looks amazing." Every single time. Perfect. With no way to stop it, my stepdad chose a different battle plan: avoidance. Every time I came by to finalize details, he stayed in his office. If guests arrived, he made himself scarce. When vendors called about deliveries, he pretended not to hear. At one point, the rental company dropped off tables and chairs, and he refused to move his car from the driveway to let them in. Fiancé handled it. No words. Just stood there, staring until my stepdad finally, grumbling under his breath, moved it. Meanwhile, my mom suddenly decided she was the perfect host. She walked around smiling for guests, acting like the gracious, generous matriarch who had opened her home out of love. One cousin mentioned how lucky I was to have parents willing to do this. My mom beamed. I just smiled back. Yeah, we really couldn't have done it without them. Not a lie. The house was set. The guests were settled. The wedding was happening. But my mom? She had one last card to play. That night, she insisted on enforcing an old-school wedding tradition. Fiancé and I, according to her, should sleep separately the night before. For good luck. For purity. For tradition. I didn't even blink. Maybe we should have followed tradition and not stolen from your daughter. Silence. She didn't bring it up again. At this point, some extended family members started picking up on the weirdness, the awkward interactions, the way my stepdad avoided eye contact, how my mom looked a little too eager to take credit for the wedding. A few whispers floated around. Something was off. That night, as I went to double-check the last-minute details, my mom pulled me aside. She still wanted control, wanted some kind of power over the situation. She tried pushing one more time, saying this was too much pressure on them and maybe we should just scale everything back. I didn't argue, didn't yell, just leaned in and said one sentence: "If you make this difficult, I will tell everyone exactly why this wedding is happening here." She didn't say another word. As I was leaving, my fiancé paused at the door and looked directly at my parents, calm, collected. Then, he said, "This could have been at a fancy venue, but you made your choice." And with that, we left. Tomorrow, the wedding, and they would have to sit through every single second of it. The morning of the wedding, the house was already buzzing with activity before the sun even fully rose. Vans started pulling into the driveway. The rental company was unloading chairs, tables, and decorations. The florist arrived with an entire setup for the arch, and the catering team started unloading supplies to begin food prep. This should have been a smooth operation. Should have been. The first issue? My stepdad's car, parked right in the middle of the driveway, blocking the florist's van from getting in. One of the vendors knocked on the door, asking if the car could be moved. My mom peeked out, then conveniently disappeared before answering. The florist knocked again. Nothing. Vendors were stuck waiting, unable to unload anything. That's when fiancé stepped in. Without hesitation, he walked up to my stepdad's door and knocked. No response. So he knocked again. Louder. Finally, the door cracked open. Stepdad stood there, arms crossed, refusing to move. Fiancé didn't back down. Move it or we're towing it. There was a long pause. Stepdad stared. Fiancé stared back. Then, finally, the car moved. Florist got in. Game on. With the decorations being set up, Mom started hovering. First, it was the centerpieces. She walked around, swapping out the ones she didn't like for some dollar store decorations she pulled from a closet. Then, she started moving chairs into different positions because it would look better this way. She even tried to switch out the table settings. I let her do it for 5 minutes. Then, loud enough for vendors and some early arriving family members to hear, I said you lost the right to have input the moment you stole our wedding fund. Silence. A few guests looked up. A florist froze mid-bouquet placement. My mom's face flushed red. She dropped the centerpiece she was holding and walked inside without a word. Guests started trickling in. At first, everything seemed normal. Smiling faces, compliments on the setup, casual small talk. Then, the whispers started. Why does the bride seem so tense with her mom? Why is the stepdad just lurking in the corner? Why does it feel weird? And then Grandma arrived. Grandma's explosion now, my grandma-mom's mom, isn't the type to ignore drama. She noticed the awkwardness immediately. She saw my mom sitting at the kitchen table, arms crossed, clearly upset. She saw my stepdad sulking like a child. And she saw me running the show, not as a bride enjoying her big day, but as someone making sure nothing got ruined. Grandma pulled me aside. What's going on? So, I told her. The whole thing. From the stolen wedding fund to the fake generosity to the passive-aggressive sabotage. Grandma lost it. She marched straight into the kitchen, where my mom was still pouting, and let her have it. You stole from your own daughter. You think that's acceptable? Guests turned to look. Conversation stopped. My mom started stammering. It wasn't like that. Oh, it was like that. Grandma wasn't holding back. You didn't just take money. You took her dream. And now you're acting like you the victim. By now, half the guests were staring. And then, the waterworks. My mom burst into fake tears. She covered her face, sobbing loudly, making sure everyone in the room heard her distress. But this time, it didn't work. Instead of sympathy, people started choosing sides. Some relatives rushed to comfort me. Others, the ones who always defended my mom, made excuses for her. She was just trying to help. She meant well. Family should forgive each other. My stepdad? Still sulking in the corner. At one point, he grabbed a bottle of whiskey and left the room. Fine by me. One less problem to deal with. With the wedding about to begin, Mom made one final move. She called the caterer, tried changing the menu, told them the original selections were too simple, not elegant enough. But the caterer? Smart woman. She called me before making any changes. Your mother is requesting menu adjustments. Should I proceed? I smiled. Absolutely not. Stick to the original plan. Then I walked back outside and made an announcement. Loud, clear, in front of everyone. By the way, if anyone has issues with the catering, my mother tried to change it behind my back. A few guests gasped. Some exchanged glances. Mom? Frozen. She slowly turned, mouth opening as if to argue, but nothing came out. She had been caught, red-handed. At that point, she had lost. She stopped trying to interfere. Stopped trying to sabotage. Instead, she sat in the front row, arms crossed, sulking. My stepdad, nowhere to be found. And me? I was about to get married. At the wedding they never wanted to happen, the chairs were set. The decorations were in place. Guests took their seats, the soft hum of conversation filling the air as the ceremony was about to begin. Despite the morning chaos, excitement built. The whispers about my parents' behavior faded into the background as people focused on the reason they were here, to celebrate our wedding. Except for 2 people. My mom sat in the front row, arms crossed, lips tight, looking like she had just sucked on a lemon. Most parents beam with joy when their daughter gets married. Not mine. She barely lifted her head. Next to her, my stepdad refused to stand when the music started playing. Most fathers or stepfathers stand to honor the bride's entrance. He sat stone-faced, arms folded, legs spread like a bouncer at a club. I didn't stop. I walked past them, arm in arm with my soon-to-be husband, completely ignoring their childish display. And fiancé's family? They noticed. His mom exchanged glances with his dad. His aunt whispered something to his uncle. Even some of my cousins shifted uncomfortably. It was clear to everyone now. My parents weren't just reluctant hosts. They were bitter, resentful, and making a fool of themselves. The officiant welcomed everyone. The usual words about love and commitment filled the air. The atmosphere finally shifted. Everything that had led up to this, the stress, the drama, the stolen money, faded into the background. Fiancé took my hands. We locked eyes. As we started our vows, guests leaned in, fully invested in the moment. And then, Mom struck. Right before the I do's, a loud, dramatic sob cut through the ceremony. It wasn't real emotion. It was fake, attention-seeking, poorly timed nonsense. All eyes snapped to her. She covered her face with a tissue, her shoulders shaking. A few of her loyal enablers patted her back, whispering comforting words. The officiant paused. For a split second, it was like she had successfully hijacked the moment. I didn't acknowledge it, didn't react. I continued my vows. The officiant picked right back up, ignoring her display just as I had. It was like a spotlight had been ripped away from her. Her sobs died out. The ceremony moved on. As the officiant continued, my stepdad made his final move. A low mutter, just loud enough for people near him to hear this as a joke. Unfortunately for him, it wasn't quiet enough. A chair creaked as someone turned toward him. My fiancé's uncle, a six and no-nonsense kind of man, spoke loud enough for everyone to hear. If you don't want to be here, leave. It was like a slap across the entire crowd. A few gasps, some murmurs. My stepdad stiffened, but he didn't move. Because he couldn't. Walking out now would confirm to everyone exactly what kind of man he was. So he sat there, face tight, shoulders stiff, eyes locked forward. Defeated. The vows ended. The officiant asked the final question. The I do's were said. And then we kissed. Cheers erupted. Applause filled the air, drowning out any lingering negativity. The focus was back where it should have been. On us. After the ceremony, guests moved toward the reception setup, while the photographer gathered family for pictures. Mom suddenly reappeared, plastering a wide, forced smile across her face. She stood close, making sure she was front and center. But the photographer? Not an idiot. After one obligatory family picture, he subtly shifted focus. More shots with me and fiancé, more with his family, more with friends and supportive relatives. Mom's smile started slipping. She tried repositioning herself, tried hovering. Didn't matter. She had lost control of the narrative, and the photographer was capturing it all. As the reception began, my fiancé and I stole a quiet moment by the entrance. Behind us, guests laughed, music played, and the party we had fought for was in full swing. My parents? Sitting stiffly at a table, barely interacting with anyone. My fiancé watched them for a second. Then, without even looking at me, he said, "I can't wait to leave this house forever." I didn't need to respond, because he was right. We had won. We were married. And after today, we would never owe my parents another moment of our time. The ceremony was over. The pictures were taken. Now it was time to party. Guests moved to the reception area, where the tables were set, the music started playing, and dinner was being served. For the first time in the entire day, things felt light. People were laughing, eating, and enjoying themselves. The stress from earlier? Gone. Except for two people. My mom sat at the front table, smiling just enough to keep up appearances, but stiff as a board. My stepdad? Nowhere to be found. The guests didn't care. They were having fun. And then, Mom made her move. As the night went on, glasses clinked, signaling time for toasts. I was expecting my maid of honor to go first. Then my best man. But before either of them could get up, my mom suddenly grabbed the microphone. I'd like to say a few words. The energy in the room shifted. Some guests turned to look at each other. A few of my cousins sat up, already sensing drama. My mom stood there, mic in hand, soaking in the attention. I let it sit for 1 second. Then, without missing a beat, I stepped up. Actually, my male is going first. The entire room snapped to me. A few surprised laughs. Some stifled chuckles. Mom froze. And my male? She stood right up, walked over, and took the mic. If my mom was planning some last-minute redemption arc, my male shut it down. Her speech. Flawless. She talked about love, about respect, about trust, about how family is about lifting each other up, not tearing each other down. Every word, a direct hit. She never mentioned my parents by name. She didn't have to. Everyone knew. Mom sat there, clapping stiffly, smiling through gritted teeth. Mill handed the mic back. I took it, paused, then turned to my mom. Now it's your turn. It was a test. She hesitated for a second. She had lost momentum. She gave a short, generic speech about how she was so happy for us. No emotion, no warmth. She sat down quickly. She knew she had lost. As the toast continued, people started looking around. Where was my stepdad? Not at the table. Not with my mom. Someone spotted him inside the house, alone, drinking. He had completely checked out. At that point, nobody cared. And then, Grandma took the mic. The same grandma who had publicly scolded my mom earlier in the day. The room went silent. She turned to me and spoke loud and clear. "I just want to say how proud I am of you for handling this situation with so much grace." She didn't elaborate. She didn't have to. Everyone knew exactly what she meant. My mom shrunk in her seat. Some people clapped. A few guests whispered among themselves. And then, the final cherry on top. Throughout the night, one thing kept happening. Guests kept complimenting the kitchen. "Wow, this remodel is gorgeous. You guys really upgraded the place. I love this backsplash. It looks expensive." Every time, my mom forced a smile. Every time, my stepdad, when he was briefly around, looked like he wanted to crawl into a hole. And then, fiancé delivered the finishing blow. Loud enough for half the room to hear, he clinked his glass and said we should do a housewarming party next, since we all paid for it. Laughter erupted. A few people gasped, realizing what he just said. Mom? Her jaw clenched. Stepdad? Didn't even come back outside. Cornered, embarrassed, humiliated, my mom made her last move. She stood up, raising her voice over the crowd. "It wasn't just your money." The laughter died down. Some heads turned. She grasped for control. "We had plans to pay you back." Silence. And then, I started clapping. Slow, deliberate. Every eye in the room was on me. I tilted my head, smiled. "Wow," I said. "I'd love to know when that was going to happen." A ripple of chuckles. Mom's face went white. She sat down. End of discussion. Whispers started. A cousin leaned over to another guest. "Wait, did they actually spend their wedding fund on this house?" A few guests turned to each other. Slowly, people started doing the math. And then, one brave cousin, one who never bites his tongue, asked outright, "Did you guys actually use their wedding fund for this?" Mom's face went red. She stammered. It wasn't like that. Silence. Nobody believed her. I laughed. Loud. Lighthearted. As if this was the funniest thing I had ever heard. Then, I raised my glass. "It's fine, Mom. Enjoy the kitchen. We certainly have." A few guests laughed. Some looked completely stunned. And my mom, she finally shut up, because there was nothing left to say. It had been weeks since I last heard from my parents. After the wedding disaster, the failed PR stunt, and the online backlash, they had gone completely silent. And honestly, life was peaceful. No sudden calls. No guilt-tripping texts. No passive-aggressive social media posts. Just quiet. But of course it couldn't last forever. One afternoon, out of nowhere, my phone buzzed with a long message from my mom. At first glance, it looked like an apology. It had all the right words. "I'm sorry for how things turned out. I never wanted to hurt you. We only had good intentions." But the more I read, the clearer it became. This wasn't an apology. It was damage control. No mention of stealing. No mention of taking responsibility. Just a whole lot of excuses. We thought we were doing what was best. We never meant to upset you. We're still family at the end of the day. It was the classic non-apology, no remorse, just trying to sweep everything under the rug. And stepdad didn't even bother sending a message. Not a word. I didn't waste time. I typed one simple response: "You can apologize when the $25K is back in my account." Nothing else. No arguing. No explaining. Just the one thing that actually mattered. Minutes later, my phone buzzed again. Now, the excuses really started. It's not that simple. We don't have the money right now. We were planning to pay you back, but things are tight. I didn't even hesitate. Then you didn't have the money when you spent it either. Silence. For the first time in this entire mess, my mom had nothing to say. A few hours later, another message came through. This time, she went for the guilt trip. I was just trying to make our home better for the family. I let out a breath and typed back, "Then why wasn't I considered part of the family when you stole my money?" Again, no response. Desperate now, she tried a new angle. "One day, the house will be yours." That actually made me laugh. A last-ditch effort to act like this was some kind of investment for my benefit. I wasn't buying it. I shot back, "I don't want a house tainted with broken trust. I wanted my wedding, not a future maybe asset." Another pause. Then, the classic "you're being cruel" argument. Now she was fully leaning into playing the victim. "I can't believe you're treating me like this. You're tearing the family apart. Do you really want this to be how we end things?" I didn't even flinch. I sent back one final message. Who tore the family apart? The one who got stolen from, or the one who stole? And then, nothing. No response. A full day passed. Then 2. Then a week. She had finally stopped trying. No more messages. No more guilt trips. No more weak attempts to shift the blame. And stepdad? He pulled his final, petty move. A notification popped up on my phone. Stepdad had blocked me and my fiancé on social media, as if he was the victim in all of this. As if he was the one cutting us off. It was pathetic. And honestly, it was a relief. There was never going to be an apology. There was never going to be a check in my account. And that was fine. Because now, I was free. No more fake family obligations. No more pretending things were okay. No more being their scapegoat. And I never had to step foot in that house again. At least their kitchen looked nice. With the wedding behind us, my husband and I made a decision. We were officially done with my parents. No more back and forth. No more giving them chances. No more pretending like we were ever going to see that $25K again. So we went fully no contact, blocked their numbers, removed them from social media, cut them out completely. And just like that, life got peaceful. Without my parents' constant interference, my husband and I finally got to focus on our new life together. We settled into married life, planned our honeymoon, and finally got to enjoy being newlyweds without stress. Every now and then I'd hear through the grapevine that my mom was telling people how heartbroken she was. I ignored it. I wasn't interested in her latest performance. But then, a real opportunity came along. A few months after the wedding, my husband got a job offer in another city. Better pay, better benefits, a fresh start far, far away. We packed our things, found a place, and within weeks, we were gone. Just like that, we had an entirely new life. And my parents, they had no idea where we were. It took a few months, but eventually she cracked. Out of nowhere, a message popped up from an unknown number. "I miss you." Nothing else. No apology, no acknowledgement of what she did. Just a phishing attempt, hoping I'd take the bait. I didn't. No response. No engagement. Silence. That was the final straw for some extended relatives. A few had been pressuring me to just move on and forgive my parents. When I refused, they cut contact with me instead. At first, I thought I should care. But then I realized, anyone who sided with my parents never really cared about me to begin with. Letting go? Easier than I expected. And then, karma showed up. One day, a cousin reached out. "Hey, have you heard about your parents?" I hadn't. Because again, no contact. That's when they told me. They were struggling financially. Apparently, they had taken out multiple loans to cover the kitchen remodel, thinking they'd be fine. But then, stepdad's job situation changed. His company restructured, and his salary got cut significantly. Now, they were barely keeping up with mortgage payments. And the cherry on top, they had listed the house for sale. They had used our wedding fund to upgrade their house, a house they thought they would enjoy for years to come. And now, they couldn't even afford to keep it. My husband's reaction? So they stole from us to upgrade a house they couldn't even keep? Perfectly said. I wasn't happy about their financial struggles. I wasn't celebrating it. But I sure didn't feel bad either. They had a choice. They could have given me my wedding. They could have done the right thing. Instead, they stole from us, tried to control us, tried to rewrite the story to make themselves look like victims. And in the end, they lost the one thing they sacrificed everything for. I got my wedding, despite them. They got nothing. Karma is real. I never reached out to them again. Never asked what happened after they sold the house. Never wondered where they ended up. Because it wasn't my problem anymore. I blocked them permanently. And I never looked back.